It's May 30th, 2022. I'm Todd Dunn. Today I'm aboard my 1972 Allied Princess Sequester. And what I want to do is talk a little bit about buying an old fiberglass boat. Now, there are quite a few old fiberglass boats available on the market. They range in quality and condition from like new to boats that I would be wary to set foot on when they're hauled out. So you have to really watch the condition of a boat. But they have one big advantage. A boat the age of Sequester here, 50 years, could have a pretty good price. You could get quite a bit of boat for not much money, particularly compared to a newer boat. So the thing you have to make a decision about is what, if any, are deal breakers in terms of buying an old fiberglass boat. How important are cosmetics to you? Painting a boat can be very expensive, especially if you hire it done. Matter of fact, having anything done on your boat can be very, very expensive. And the only way to keep the price down is to have the boat be a do-it-yourself project. And even then, there are some systems that could be deal breakers. So what I'm going to do over the next few videos in this series, and I'm going to create its own playlist, Buying an Old Fiberglass Boat, is go over various systems on a boat that could be deal breakers in terms of buying an old boat. So we're going to start out with probably the potential biggest deal breaker on an old fiberglass boat. And the kind of boat I'm talking about is a sailboat, probably in the 30+ foot range. So we're not talking about dinghies and day sailors. We're talking about boats that you can go cruising on, something like this Allied 36, which is plenty big enough for two people to cruise on very comfortably. And it's stout enough to take more than you can. So this size boat. So one thing, probably the most expensive system to replace and upgrade on a boat is the engine. Now, I know some people are going to say, oh, you don't need an engine, it's a sailboat. Well, if you're ever going to go into a marina, if you're going to go any place against a significant current, you're going to make passages, you're going to need some sort of engine. A lot of marinas won't take you if you don't have an engine. They certainly are not going to be very happy about you trying to sail into a slip. The chance of hitting another boat is very large. A wind shift can put you right up against a $1 million yacht, whose paint job is worth more than your boat by maybe a factor of 2 or 3. So you're going to want to have an engine. Some people might say, well, if it has a diesel engine, I'll just take it out and make the boat electric. Well, I can tell you right off the top that if you want to look at doing that, there are two things that might make you change your mind. One, in order to have any kind of range at all at any speed more than say 2 knots, you're going to need a big and very expensive battery bank. And you're going to have to consider charging. How are you going to recharge the batteries? If you're going to take the boat cruising and anchor out a lot, your options are a generator, which is another diesel engine, solar or wind, and to a much lesser extent, regeneration through the prop. Now, regeneration through the prop can provide you some power as long as you're going relatively quickly, say 6 knots or more. But at low speed, unless you're making a passage across the Atlantic Ocean, for example, you're not going to put in enough power into your battery bank to operate systems and have more than a few, maybe 10 or 15 miles range upon arrival. And solar on a sailboat, well, let me put it this way. You don't have room for a meaningful solar array to replace the power that you're going to use while running the engine for more than, an hour or so a day, even in full sun. You just don't have room for enough solar panels to replace the power that an electric motor will consume. So realistically, right now, because of cost and charging considerations, electric propulsion really isn't that viable for a cruising sailboat. So that means probably that you're going to have a diesel engine to deal with. A boat this size, unless it's really old, older than 50 years, is certainly going to have a diesel engine. An older boat, if you've got something from the late 50s, earliest 60s, you might find one with a gas engine, but those will mostly have been replaced with diesels over the years. So, diesel engine, that is probably the most expensive system on the boat to replace if you have to. And unless you're pretty skilled, you're probably going to have to hire it done. This boat has a Westerbeek 46 diesel engine. It weighs over 500 pounds. And that is a non-trivial item to be moving around in the boat. So you don't want to replace the diesel engine. There are maintenance issues that are going to come up, even on an engine that's functional. The engine in this boat was put in 1987. It has about 1,250 hours right now, which is not a problem. That's the lifetime of this engine in a sailboat is probably more like 4,000 to 5,000 hours. So there's plenty of life left in my engine, but I've had a number of issues that if you buy an old boat, you might have to deal with. For sure, you're going to have issues with the raw water cooling system. That is the raw water pump that pumps salt water through the heat exchanger and then out the exhaust. That potentially might need to be rebuilt, new bearings, etc. Now you can do that yourself relatively cheaply. Rebuild kit's probably under $100. If you hire it done, it's going to cost probably at least double that, maybe triple, depending on where it is and how hard it is to get it off the boat. And if you have to buy a new one, that could cost you $500 to $700 or $800 for a new pump, plus any labor if you hire someone to do it for you. So easily up around $1,000. The freshwater circulation pump. This is the pump that circulates the antifreeze within the engine. That failed on this boat last year. And most sailboat engine parts are not cheap. I paid nearly $1,000 for a new freshwater circulation pump for this Westerbeek engine. And I was lucky that they had one. Matter of fact, I got the last one that Westerbeek had. So the next person with a Westerbeek 46 whose freshwater pump fails is going to be spending a lot of time looking for a replacement pump. So an old engine, old parts may or may not be available. And some of them are pretty specific to the boat, particularly in the cooling system. Those are the ones you really might have some difficulty finding, because cooling systems on marine diesels are put on by aftermarket manufacturers of marine diesel engines. They buy an engine like a Kubota diesel and they marinize it by putting custom parts onto it for the cooling system. Transmission is another expensive item. A marine transmission is going to cost you well over $1,000. So you need to evaluate the condition of the engine quite carefully Make sure that everything is working. The cooling system is working properly. All the bearings seem tight. There are no leaks. You need to make sure the transmission is working properly, that there aren't any issues there. And the rest of it is just a regular diesel engine. So it's a good idea to spend a little money up front on a boat that you've decided is worth making an offer on, to hire an engine surveyor who will check out the engine thoroughly, do compression tests and things like that, and make sure that the engine is running properly, that the cooling system is working, and that everything on the engine works properly. Because it doesn't take much to cost you thousands of dollars to have to repair it. And if you need to replace the diesel engine in a boat, I can tell you that a replacement diesel engine for this boat, if I just went out and bought one today, if I could get one with the supply issues that are going around, it would cost me in the neighborhood of $15,000 at the low end for a new diesel engine for this boat. That doesn't include taking the old diesel engine out, modifying the engine beds where the engine sits, and then reinstalling the engine and getting it connected to the propeller shaft, getting it all lined up. If you change the engine's operating RPMs and or horsepower very much at all, you're probably also going to have to, at the very least, have your propeller reworked, and quite possibly you might have to buy a new propeller. So depending on how much of the work you can do yourself, basically you might be able to get the engine out of the boat by hiring a boom truck to come and lift it off the boat, and then hiring a boom truck again to lift the new engine onto the boat. And if you're handy, you can modify the engine beds so that the new engine fits. But even then, you're probably looking at $5,000 to maybe $10,000 to get that new engine installed on the boat. So let's say this boat, $24,000, $25,000 to repower, unless you can do a lot of it yourself. I had the prop reconditioned and repitched on this boat a couple of years ago, well, 8 years ago now. And 8 years ago, it cost $400 to have the prop serviced. I removed it, took it into the prop shop, and had them repitch it, clean it all up, and get everything just right on it. But then I had to relap it onto the shaft and replace the cutlass bearing and a few other things. And I think altogether, servicing the prop ended up adding about $700 or $800 to the cost of the service work I did. So figure on, if you decide you are buying a boat, if the engine's an issue, figure on 20 grand, 25 grand to replace it with a new engine. Now, a new engine is wonderful. It's reliable. It's under warranty, and it should operate without any issues for quite a few years. But it's still going to cost you a lot of money. And having an unreliable engine is a real problem, because if you can't trust it to run when you need it to, it's going to limit how you use the boat. So that's what I want to say here is, if you're looking at an old sailboat, check the engine out thoroughly. Don't just see if it cranks over and maybe starts. Make sure it's running properly, it's not smoking, it's not burning oil, the cooling system is working properly, it isn't leaking, the alternator works, because everything on a marine diesel engine is expensive. And as I said, replacing a diesel engine is a big job and costs a lot of money. So that's what I wanted to talk about today, just to point out the most expensive system on a sailboat like this, if you have to replace it, is pretty likely to be the engine. Now, it could cost you a lot of money if you had to replace the mast, and that'll be something we'll talk about in the next video when I'm going to look at masts and standing rigging. Okay, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't, why don't you consider subscribing to my channel? See you in the next video.